Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Mistress of Philosophy, still on the train called Indian Philosophy. I promise you that in the next few sessions, we will end this general discussion and go on to other interesting topics. But first, let me come back to what Dayakrishna said. Dayakrishna said to Jay Garfield and Nalini Bhushan, apparently in an interview, that the only kind of philosophy that can be called Indian philosophy properly or legitimately is that philosophy which is done in Sanskrit. What he meant to perhaps say is that when we do Indian philosophy in English or in other languages, perhaps a lot of philosophy gets lost in translation. Which is why sometimes when you're a real good Indian philosopher, you would break out into Sanskrit and say something from the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvadharman Parityajamamekam Sharanam Braja, blah, 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 blah. So it's become a fashion among people to actually throw these Sanskrit words in classes and impress people. I can do that. I can just break out into Sanskrit song in the middle of a class, and it feels very profound. And as my colleague sometimes makes fun of it, you can actually say invectives in a very serious manner and or sing praises of a woman's beautiful body, and it will all seem very profound because you don't understand the meaning of the language, right? And so philosophy can be lost in translation. It is true, but it doesn't mean that every philosophy that is done in English cannot be Indian philosophy also. So it's a very difficult kind of situation to be in, that you are born in a country where Sanskrit is nothing but something that is taught in very elite and very sequestered institutions, and you need a lot of memory for Sanskrit because the way it is taught is the same way perhaps it was taught for years and years. And when I was doing a look over on the Sanskrit institutions and the way Sanskrit is taught, it is still with a by rote kind of pedagogy where you're learning all the verbs and tenses and everything by rote, and slowly you get to learn to speak the language. Spoken Sanskrit, on the other hand, is very, very not proper grammatical Sanskrit, but a more usage-friendly Sanskrit. But the problem is you can only speak Sanskrit to those who know Sanskrit. So if you are out on the road and you suddenly ask, Kutra Bhavan, where are you? And people may not even understand, and they may think you're calling them names, or that you're profoundly saying something about eternal wisdom. So that is something that we have to face because we live in this multilingual country where most of our texts are in Sanskrit or Pali or Prakrit for that matter. So Sanskrit is, I don't know whether it's a relief to Indian philosophy or it causes more problems. But then that's all we have, right? Those are the texts we have. And so even though these were produced by upper caste Brahmins, not many people were allowed to study them. They were guarded inside the gates of these institutions that did not allow other people to come and study. Particularly women were not allowed to study these. And then there were also people had to go through a great deal of difficulty to actually get a teacher to teach them this kind of philosophical system. So it was mostly, it was not only rare for people to learn philosophy, it was also rare for people to teach philosophy in a public way. So it's largely an old, ancient, elitist institution of Indian philosophy. These people sat together in Sanskrit and talked God knows what. So that way we are guilty of gatekeeping Indian philosophy so far. But that's the texts we have. And now it's up to us to continue to gatekeep these inside these kind of paradigms, or should we set them free? And I think translating things into English is some way of setting the philosophy free. Yeah, there will be something lost in translation, but more or less I think it is possible for us to preserve translation or conceptual translation as you translate, or you can change the translation, thereby expanding the conceptual meaning of the word or the concept that you're studying. Take, for instance, nature, which I have studied a lot and I have a lot to say about it. So if you use the word nature, you can translate it into the Indian languages into Sanskrit as Prakriti. I'm doing a reverse translation here. So Prakriti comes from the Sankhya philosophy, and therefore it has a wider range of meanings than nature. So when you say Prakriti to an Indian, it means something else. When you say nature to an Indian, it means something else. So this actually increases the conceptual variety or diversity of meanings that you can give to a word. On the other hand, if you wanted to preserve something that asks a question about an original concept, let's say environment, right? That's a very beautiful translation. Environ, that which encircles, that which is surrounding us. Okay, so that word, that meaning has that idea of surrounding, of enveloping, of being a circle, of being a bubble inside which we live. So when you say the word environment and you translate it into parisara, pari, that which surrounds, that which environs us, that which kind of envelops us or encloses us, you find that the questions you ask about the concept of environment are the same kind of questions you can ask about the word parisara. There's not much conceptual difference in it. So you are probably, when you're studying environment, you're also studying parisara. So the environment is dirty, parisara is dirty. The environment is polluted, parisara is polluted. So it's very easy. Whereas when you say the word natural, it means something that is original, that is as opposed to something that is human or cultural. Whereas when you say Prakriti, human beings are included in Prakriti. There's nothing called one of my friends was trying to translate the word culture, and they came up with the word kalachara or kalachar or something like that. It was very difficult because the idea of nature culture division does not exist in Indian philosophy in such a deep manner. We have other kinds of divisions, other kinds of binaries, but we don't have this nature culture binary. And so here Prakriti is opposed to Purusha, which is basically a different principle altogether. The origins of it are different. It is like having two adjacent trains in the same station at present. One has come all the way from Delhi and the other has come from Bombay, and they both are standing at Bangalore stations. Though both of them mean the same thing, they both mean nature, but yet one has come from some other place, another meaning has come from another place. So they both have different conceptual histories. They come from different genealogies of thinking. So this is something that happens in translation. And so when you translate Indian philosophy, Indian texts from Sanskrit into English, or from Pali into English, or from any other language into English, their meaning changes. So a lot of Indian philosophers in contemporary times are doing excellent work on translation and excellent work on trying to conceptually understand a different kind of meaning that could arise from certain words being used in Indian philosophy in their context. Take, for example, even the word liberation. When I first went to an interfaith meeting and they were talking to me about liberation theology, my head was going around the idea of moksha, because that's what I'm being familiarized with. But then I realized liberation theology means a completely different thing in the Western context. In the Christian context, in the Christian faith, it has a complete different meaning. So I had to literally sit down and study all those texts in order to understand what I had to speak about when I was talking about liberation theology. We don't have a liberation theology in that sense of the word. We have moksha dharma shastra, which is a completely different kind of conceptualization of what it means to be human. So this is where I think even comparative philosophy falls into a kind of what's possible to do in comparative philosophy and what's not possible to do in comparative philosophy. So Indian philosophy, therefore, becomes philosophy in translation. And the questions about translation remain for us. There's a whole study area called translation studies, because these problems are not only of philosophy, they're perhaps compounded by philosophy because of the conceptual difficulties, but they also exist in literature. Translating a poem is not easy. Translating a novel is not easy. Translating Kick the Bucket into He Went to Heaven is very difficult, because kicking the bucket is a different kind of dying, and going to heaven is a different kind of dying. So the varieties of words and meanings that we have are interesting, which brings me back to my last one-liner. Indian philosophy perhaps is best studied as philosophy of language, because one of the richest areas that I've found very interesting in Indian philosophy is the idea of language. So we had a lot of work being done on the idea of word, meaning, sign, signifier, because we are great at classifying and we also loved grammar. For some strange reason, we have huge amount of respect for grammarians, and the grammarians had their own kind of philosophical stream. So in the next episode, we are going to look at what are the classifications of Indian philosophy and whether they actually work for us. And we'll also look next week at the two kinds of philosophies, that is, the way philosophies are categorized and studied in academic philosophy as well as in popular philosophy. So I want to end with the last word today. Last time I mentioned kasmai. Kasmai means for whom. The reason I said kasmai and then I said why immediately after is to actually confuse you. Because when I say some word and then I say a word immediately after that in English, you think that is the meaning of the word. So this is to tell you to be careful with Sanskrit words, because they may not mean what they actually mean when you hear them without attention. So subscribe the button and see you again next week. I hope these shorter videos are more easily palatable to your philosophical food for the day and for the week. Keep thinking and see you next week.